My name is Sophie. I'm 29 years old. I always believed in love. I thought marriage would last forever. But I was mistaken. I met Daniel 5 years ago. He worked in the same office as me. He was kind and polite. Every morning he brought me coffee. Every afternoon he asked how I was feeling. I smiled a lot whenever I was around him. He wasn't wealthy. He didn't drive a fancy car. But he made me feel secure. He made me laugh. He told me I was unique. I began to fall in love with him. Believed he loved me too. One day he asked me to go out with him. Said yes. We went for a walk in the park and talked for hours. I felt truly happy. It was simple but it felt right. After a few months, he asked me to marry him. He said he didn't want to wait. He said life was short. I was surprised but also thrilled. Said yes. We had a small wedding. Just close friends and family. He looked at me with loving eyes and said, "You are my everything." I believed him. I trusted every word. We moved into a small apartment. I loved our place. It was peaceful and tidy. We didn't have much money, but it didn't bother me. I thought love was all we needed. In the first year, Daniel was loving. He helped me cook. He made tea when I felt tired. On weekends, we watched movies and had meals together. He often told me he was lucky to have me. But slowly, everything began to change. He started coming home late. He said he had extra work. He began checking his phone in a different room. He took phone calls outside. When I asked questions, he smiled and said, "Nothing's wrong." He no longer helped much around the house. When I spoke, he didn't pay attention. He seemed distant. Even when he was sitting next to me, I felt alone. I started feeling worried. I asked him again, "Is everything okay?" He replied, "Yes, I'm just tired." I wanted to believe him. I wished things would go back to how they used to be. One day I made his favorite dinner. I cleaned the entire house. I wore the dress he once said he liked. I waited for him with hope. But he didn't come home on time. He came back very late. He looked surprised when he saw the food. He didn't even say sorry. He said I had forgotten to tell him. Then he went to take a shower. I felt hurt, but I didn't cry. I quietly cleaned the dishes and went to bed. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the wall. My mind was filled with questions. I wondered if I had done something wrong. Maybe he didn't love me anymore. One morning I noticed something unusual. There was lipstick on the collar of his shirt. It wasn't my shade. I held the shirt in my hands for a long time. Then I put it back in the closet. I didn't ask him that day. I was too afraid. But after that I started paying closer attention. I smelled perfume on his jacket. He had never used perfume before. He began using new words. He even changed his hairstyle. I wasn't foolish. I knew something was wrong. But I was still too scared to say anything. I hoped it would stop. Maybe he would change. Then one Sunday he said he needed to go to the office. But everything outside was quiet. Called the office phone. No one picked up. Waited. I sat in the kitchen for hours. He came back in the evening. He looked tired but also happy. I looked into his eyes. He smiled, but it wasn't the same smile I used to know. I asked, "Where were you?" He said, "I told you at work." I wanted to yell, but I didn't. I just looked at him and said, "I called your office." His face changed. Just for a second. Then he laughed and said, "I was in a meeting." I didn't believe him. But I didn't say anything more. I just went to the bedroom and closed the door. That night I couldn't sleep again. My heart was full of pain. I thought about our early days. The walks, the tea, the little jokes. I missed those moments. I missed the man I married. The next day I went for a walk alone. I walked to the park where we had our first date. I sat on a bench and watched people around me. I saw couples holding hands. I saw kids playing. I felt like I was the only one there without love. I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't want to talk to my friends. I didn't want my parents to worry. I just wanted the truth. When I came back home, Daniel was watching TV. He smiled and asked, How was your walk? I looked at him and said, I know you're hiding something. He looked surprised. Then he asked, What do you mean? I said, You're not the same. You don't look at me like you used to. You lie about work. You smell different. I saw lipstick on your shirt. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he stood up and said, I think you're tired. You're overthinking. He left the room. Sat there. My hands felt cold. My eyes were dry. I didn't want to cry anymore. I needed answers. That night, I waited for him to fall asleep. Then I took his phone. I didn't want to do it. But I had to know the truth. I checked his messages. What I saw broke my heart. There were many texts. From one woman. Her name was Rachel. She called him my love. She sent him pictures. She asked when he would see her again. He replied, Soon, my wife doesn't know. I stared at those words over and over. My wife doesn't know. He had been lying to me. Every single day. He told me he loved me. But he was with someone else. I placed the phone back where it was. I sat down on the floor. I covered my face. But I didn't cry. I just sat there in silence. That night I couldn't sleep. I watched the sky grow dark. Then I watched it become light again. And I knew something had to change. Before I share the rest of my story, I need to ask, where are you listening from? Knowing someone hears me. Someone who understands. Gives me strength. The next morning I made tea. I placed 2 cups on the table. Daniel came into the kitchen. He said, Good morning. I didn't smile. I looked at his face. He sat down and sipped his tea. I asked, Who is Rachel? He looked at me. His expression changed. He said, Why are you asking? I said, I saw your phone. He went silent. Then he said, It was nothing. I replied, Please tell me the truth. He stood up. He said, It's a small thing. I made a mistake. I asked, Do you love her? He didn't answer. He stared at the floor. Then he said softly, I don't know. Felt a chill inside. I looked at my cup. My hands didn't move. I said, You lied to me. He said, I didn't want to hurt you. I answered, But you did hurt me. Then he picked up his bag and left the house. I sat there alone. I didn't cry. I just felt exhausted. I stared at the door. He was gone. The house was silent. Cleaned the cups. Then I walked into the bedroom. I sat on the bed and looked out the window. I asked myself many questions. Why did he lie? When did it begin? What did I do wrong? In the evening he came home. He said, Can we talk? I replied, Talk about what? He said, I want to fix this. I looked at him. I said, You were happy with her. He said, It was just talking. I looked into his eyes. I said, You sent her pictures. You called her my love. That's not just talking. He looked down and said, I know. I'm sorry. That night I slept in the other room. Closed the door. I didn't want to see his face. I turned off the light. I stared at the wall. My heart felt heavy. But I stayed calm. In the morning I left the house. I went to visit my friend Emma. She opened the door and asked, Are you okay? I said, No. I need to talk. We sat in her kitchen. I told her everything. I told her he was seeing another woman. Her name was Rachel. I had seen the messages. Emma stayed silent. She handed me a cup of tea. She softly said, You didn't do anything wrong. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I said, I don't know what to do. Emma said, Come stay with me for a few days. I said, Okay. Thank you. I went back home that afternoon. Daniel wasn't there. Packed my clothes. Took my phone. I grabbed my bag. I looked around the room. It was quiet. I placed my house key on the table. Then I left. I stayed at Emma's house. I slept in her small guest room. It was warm and clean. She gave me food. She let me rest. She didn't ask too many questions. And I was truly grateful. Daniel sent many messages. He said, "Please talk to me." He said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I miss you." But I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. After 3 days he called me. I didn't pick up. Then he sent one more message. "I ended things with Rachel. Please come back." I read the message. But I didn't believe it. I remembered his face when I asked him the truth. He didn't say sorry right away. He only stopped once I found the messages. He didn't love me the way I loved him. One day I returned to the apartment. Daniel wasn't home. I unlocked the door, packed more clothes, took my books. I saw a photo of us on the wall. We looked happy in that picture. But it wasn't real. He hadn't been honest. I placed the photo inside a drawer and closed it. Then I left again. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I slowly walked down the stairs. I stepped outside. I took a deep breath. The air was cold, but I felt free. That night I sat on Emma's couch. I sipped warm tea. I looked at the sky through the window. I saw the stars. I felt sadness, but also strength. I knew he would keep sending messages. I knew he would say more things. But I wasn't going back. The next morning Daniel called again. He asked, "Can we meet?" I replied, "No. I need time." He said, "I'll wait." I didn't answer. Emma smiled at me. She said, "You are brave." I said, "No. I'm just tired." She replied, "You're still strong." I began helping around the house. I helped with cooking and cleaning. I started searching for a small place of my own. Emma said, "You can stay longer." I smiled and said, "Thank you. But I want my own room." I found a small apartment near her house. It had one bed, one table, and a tiny kitchen. We moved in. It was peaceful. I liked the silence. I bought new bed sheets. I made tea every morning. I read simple books. I took walks in the park. Daniel still tried calling. He left flowers at my door. He sent more messages. One of them said, "I'm not the same without you." But I didn't reply. One day I saw him outside my new apartment. I looked through the window. He was standing there with a box in his hands. He looked around. I closed the curtain. I turned off the light. After a while, he walked away. That night I felt sad again. But I also felt safe. I made some soup. Ate by myself. I cleaned the kitchen. Then I went to bed early. My heart felt still. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I'd ever meet someone new. But I knew this much. I didn't want to live with lies. I didn't want a husband who said, "I love you," to me and to someone else at the same time. I woke up early. I opened the window. The sun was shining. The sky was clear. It was a new day. I made a cup of tea. I sat at the table. My phone was on the chair. I looked at it. There were new messages from Daniel. One said, "I'm sorry." Another said, "Can I see you?" I placed the phone down. I looked outside the window again. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to see him. But I wanted to hear the truth. I wanted to ask why he hurt me. So I picked up the phone and sent a short message. "We can meet at the park. Just once." He replied quickly. "Thank you," he wrote. That afternoon I put on my coat. I walked to the park. The wind was cold. The trees swayed gently. I saw Daniel waiting by a bench. He saw me and stood up. I walked over. We both sat down. I didn't smile. He didn't either. He said, "Thank you for coming." I stayed silent. I looked at the ground. He said, "I know I did wrong." I didn't say a word. He looked at me and continued, "I lied to you. I broke your trust. I'm truly sorry." I asked, "Why did you do it?" He looked down and didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I wasn't happy. Felt lost. I met someone else. I made a mistake." I said, "You had a wife. You had a home. Why didn't you talk to me?" He replied, "I didn't want to hurt you. But I ended up hurting you anyway. I know that." I looked at him and said, You looked at me every day. You told me you loved me. But you said the same to her. He said. I ended it. I said goodbye to her. I want you back. I shook my head. I said, you should have thought of that before. He said, please give me one more chance. I answered, no, I gave you many chances. You lied every time. He looked heartbroken. He said, I still love you. I stood up. I looked at him one last time. He said, goodbye, Daniel. Then I walked away. He didn't follow me. I walked home slowly. I noticed the people in the street. Some were laughing. Some were quiet. Felt calm. When I got home, I made some tea. I sat on the floor and drank it slowly. I looked at the wall. Felt peace inside. The next morning, I cleaned my small flat. I did the laundry. I swept the floor. I made toast and eggs. I opened the window. The air felt fresh. I sat by the window and listened to the birds. That week I started walking more. I went to the market. I walked to the park. I visited a small lake nearby. One day, I saw a woman sitting on a bench. She looked about my age. She smiled at me. Smiled back. Her name was Helen. She had a little dog. The dog jumped on me. I laughed. She said, he likes you. We talked for a few minutes. She lived on my street. She was warm and kind. She said, I like your smile. We met again the next day. We walked through the park. We talked about food and music. We talked about simple things. I didn't talk about Daniel. I wasn't ready yet. But I felt better with Helen. She was kind and funny. Some days she brought her dog. Other days she brought apples. I brought tea and a bottle. We sat on a bench and shared drinks. My flat was small. But it was enough. I had a table, a chair, a bed, and a little kitchen. It was peaceful. It was clean. It was mine. At night I cooked dinner. I listened to soft music. I read simple books. I went to bed early. One evening Daniel came to my door. I didn't open it. I watched him from the window. He stood there for 5 minutes. Then he walked away. He sent one last message. It said, please forgive me. I didn't reply. I placed my phone in a drawer. I didn't want to look at it. Days went by. I met Helen again. She brought me flowers. She said, you look happy today. I smiled and said, I feel okay now. We walked around the lake. We talked about holidays and the seasons. We talked about her little dog. She asked, are you married? I said, I was. Not anymore. She looked at me gently. She said, I'm sorry. I replied, it's okay. The next day I bought a small plant. I placed it near the window. I watered it every morning. It made my room feel warm and peaceful. I started writing new words in a notebook. I wanted to learn new things. I wanted to keep my mind strong. I made a new routine. Wake up early. Eat healthy meals. Clean the house. Go for a walk. Smile when I can. I saw children playing outside. I saw elderly people sitting on benches. I watched dogs run happily through the grass. It felt calm and safe. One morning I walked past my old street. I saw the building where I used to live with Daniel. I stopped for a moment and looked at it. Then I walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I just felt finished. That life was over. My new life had already begun. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, comment, and share. More emotional and inspiring stories are coming soon.